Alright, this is another one of our confirmation question videos. The question sent to me by one of our students: why didn't God help the Jews in the Holocaust when they still trust and believe Him? This is obviously a big question, but it's a good question, and I'm going to expand the question a little bit, do some overview of what actually happened in the Holocaust, and then get into the theology of answering the question. What did God do, or where was God? And for many people, the Holocaust and World War II was an occasion where they lost faith. For others, their faith was proven. But in my opinion, my grandmother came out of Nazi Germany. It's a miracle that anyone survived the 20th century. Well, the first thing I want to do is just remind you the word Holocaust means burnt offering, and that's not the name that the Jews use for the event. The name that they use, because I think that's actually a Greek word, the word they use in Hebrew is called the Shoah, so it's the catastrophe. If you have several days or a long period of time, go on to YouTube and look up The Shoah. There is a major documentary, probably the most important documentary ever made about the Holocaust, but maybe any subject, called Shoah, where you get to see some of the people who were in the camps. He secretly interviews some of the Nazis, and it's an important work of history. Now, I think you know, probably because it's been talked about at school, there were 6 million Jews that were killed in the Holocaust, but you have to remember there were 5 to 6 million other people as well. So that would include Christians, gypsies, homosexuals, trade unionists, political prisoners, and the like. Now, oftentimes when we think of the Holocaust, we imagine the concentration camps right away. But you have to remember that before the concentration camps, the Nazis had what were called Einsatzgruppen. These were special action groups that before there were ever any camps, they went through various parts of Nazi-occupied Eastern Europe and Russia, and they would just take people out into the forest, dig mass graves, and the people would be lined up naked, and they would literally just machine gun them until the people were gone. So as you see, you had Einsatzgruppe A, B, C, and D, and these were the various routes that they took. And of the 6 million who were killed, probably 1 million happened in these Einsatzgruppen groups. And so part of what happened in the Holocaust was it was a developing scenario, and the camps that we usually think of, like Auschwitz and the like, actually came a little bit later on in the war. Now here on the screen is a map of a lot of the concentration camps, if not all the concentration camps. What I want you to notice is the only extermination camps that the Nazis had were actually in Poland. So you will see Auschwitz in the south of Poland. To the east you will see Belzec, just to the north of that Sobibor, to the north of that Treblinka, and then to the west of that Chełmno. Those were the only actual camps that were designed particularly for annihilation. And while the other camps certainly had people die, they were not meant to kill everybody who came through. They were work camps and labor camps, and horrible things happened. But it's interesting to note that the only death camps, at least that we think of, are these death camps that are located in Poland. Now, one of the things to understand about what happened in the Holocaust is the anti-Semitism of the Germans against the Jews had a long history. And this is a statue on the Lutheran Church in Wittenberg. And of course, that's the very famous city where Martin Luther did the Reformation. And you'll notice it's a picture of a pig. And then behind the pig is a man lifting up the pig's tail. And then under the pig are people feeding on the pig. And this is actually called the Judensau of Wittenberg, and that is then the Jew pig of Wittenberg. And this was unfortunately not an uncommon piece of sculpture or art, and it was a way to offend the Jews. And you'll see it says Rabbini Sham, this note above of the pig, which is kind of a taking of Hebrew and turning it into sort of gibberish from what the Germans heard. All of that to say that this sculpture, which actually goes back to around the 1300s, there was this long history of anti-Semitism in Europe, and Martin Luther, unfortunately, was an important part of that anti-Semitism. And when the Nazis did what they did, it was really the fruit of centuries of hatred and mistrust. Now, the question that you asked, why didn't God help the Jews in the Holocaust when they still trust and believe Him, is a question that even as I answer it now, or attempt to answer it, it's not going to be something that we just wrap up and are done with. The experience of the Holocaust for both the Christians, the Jews, and others who were persecuted really opened up a kind of cosmic tear in the fabric of the universe. And Christianity certainly has an answer for where God was and where God is. But also an important question to ask in addition to this one is, why didn't other people help the Jews or those who were in the extermination camps? Because the Allies, including the United States of America, knew what was happening, but they made the decision not to intervene. And in fact, if you watch some of that documentary called Shoah, you will see some of the people who actually were in the camps escaped and then went and told the Western powers, first in London and then in Washington, what was happening, and nothing came of those meetings. And some of the people that you'll see in that documentary are true heroes, some who went into Auschwitz and escaped, and another who was in the ghetto, the Polish ghetto in Warsaw, and then also was able to escape and report what he had seen. Now what I want to do is maybe change the question a little bit, at least in the way that I'm going to provide you some answers. And it's in addition to saying, why didn't God help? But it's sort of the question of, what was God doing in the Holocaust? Now we might say that the fact that the Nazis did not win the World War, and the fact that Judaism has since flourished, is a sign that, well, evil did not overcome, but that's probably little comfort to those who were actually in the experience of the Holocaust or the Second World War. And so what was God doing, but also where was God? And one of the things I want you to realize, which is important for your faith, is there were people with strong Christian convictions who resisted the Nazis, who resisted the violence of the Holocaust, and their example to us helps answer some of these questions. Now there are a lot of people I could choose, but I'm going to choose a Lutheran, and this is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a German theologian who recognized that what was happening in Germany and what was happening around issues related to the Jews and others was evil, and that the church itself had been co-opted in this evil. And he represented a voice of resistance to what the Nazis were doing. And so Dietrich Bonhoeffer is someone you should know. Now what happened was Bonhoeffer got intentionally caught up, in a plot to assassinate Hitler, and at the end of the Second World War he was arrested and finally hanged. And I'm going to show you some pictures of the camp where he was murdered, and in that camp we will be able to address the question of where God was, or what God was doing, or what is God's answer to the evil of the Holocaust. Alright, so when Bonhoeffer was arrested, he was actually taken to this concentration camp right here, Flossenburg. So if you see my little magnifying glass, this is the concentration camp that I'm going to show you some pictures of. And in fact, it's a place you can still visit, and if you ever go to Germany, it is a place I recommend you visit. Now, one of the striking things about the concentration camp is that it literally is across the street from a town. It's not like it's out in the country and people don't know about it. It is literally connected to the town of Flossenburg. What I'm showing you is a church called Jesus in the Dungeon Church, and it was made with stones that had been used to build the guard towers. And where Bonhoeffer died was just a short walk from here, a few minutes where he was hanged, and the jail cells are still there today. But if we go inside the church, I want to show you some of what they have in there, which will help us address the question. So this is obviously walking up the steps, and you see the front door, and going inside the church. When I was visiting there, actually, there was an older man sitting in one of these pews, and he was crying profusely, and it made me wonder what his story was. Now, if you see up in the front, there's an image of Jesus on the cross. And this image of Jesus on the cross is going to be for us then the central answer of what it is that God did and what God does in the face of evil and in the face of human suffering. The cross becomes the answer to your question. And it's not an easy answer like, well, there, take that. It was the cross. That was easy. It is a difficult answer. It is that God enters into the heart of darkness, God allows himself to be affected by evil, even murdered, and yet the very instruments by which God is sought to be overcome, uh, God uses finally for his own victory. And in fact, one of my favorite stained glass windows in the whole world is in this church, and I had actually been looking for pictures of it probably the last 10 years or so, and I only found them just when I was preparing to do this lecture. Alright, if you go into this church, what you find is that each of the countries that had people who were murdered there donated a window or some sort of memorial. And so you'll see this one says In Memoriam Martyrium Gallorum, which means in memory of the French martyrs. And this picture, for me, captures the answer to the question, but also the secret of the Christian life. You'll notice you have Jesus on the cross, and you have two prisoners standing there, one with Jesus looking up at him, and one too tired to go on, one asleep, one maybe who's been broken by the experience. And you'll notice Jesus has one arm nailed to the cross, and the other arm reaching down to embrace the prisoner. And we might say that this is the answer to the question. Now, it may not be an answer we like, because when human beings do evil things, and when we ourselves did not intervene in the evil that we knew, we sometimes want to put God on the hook and say, well, God, why didn't you do something about it? And Jesus on the cross represents God's answer once and for all of how to deal with evil once and for all and to overcome it. You may remember if you had to read in school the book Night by Elie Wiesel. There's a poignant scene in the book where a child gets hanged and someone says, "Where is God?" And someone says, "There is God. He's hanging in front of us." Now you can take that in different ways. You can say, well, God is dead. There is no God. And indeed you can look at Jesus on the cross and say, yes, God is dead. But then finally, after the cross, we have Easter. And for you who are Christians, make no mistake, what happened in the Holocaust, what happened in World War II, will happen again. The world will be confronted with that kind of evil again. And for you, my young friends who are adolescents, will your faith inform the decisions that you make so that you will be a voice for good and not for evil? And so notice, Jesus is nailed to the cross, and then Jesus embraces the prisoner below him. And it's precisely this solidarity of suffering that allows us to understand that for those who were victimized, for those who were murdered, Christ was present. And by Christ's embrace, that suffering goes from being meaningless to being redeemed. Now obviously this is a very Christian answer to the question. And it may very well be that some people wouldn't like that answer, and some would probably be offended by this answer. But the reason I went in this direction is it's important for you as a Christian to be able to identify how does what we say about Jesus dying and rising again, how does this inform dealing with some really bad, evil, dark stuff? God, you came and you were present in our flesh. God, you went to the cross and suffered in solidarity, not just with people who lived then, but with people who live now. Notice the prisoners are dressed as concentration camp prisoners, with their numbers, with their triangles. And God, in suffering, you embrace us, and by your embrace, we are redeemed. That's really the summary of what I wanted to tell you. We can certainly talk more about it. But like I said, look up this documentary on YouTube, Shoah, and it's by Claude Lanzmann, and it's just a profound experience with people who were in the various death camps, and he really finds just some unbelievable participants to interview. Also, I would encourage you to do this. Google this name, Maximilian Kolbe. Maximilian Kolbe was a Polish priest who was actually in Auschwitz, and there was a man who was chosen to be killed in a starvation bunker, and Maximilian Kolbe took his place. And so if you Google it, you will see a picture of Kolbe, you will see a picture of the cell where he himself died, and it's a story of how a priest rooted in the love of Jesus was able to take the place of another, but also live according to what he believed even in the face of difficulty. And so you will have to ask yourself, is faith strong enough that I don't put it aside if it's going to cost me something? And that's really an important question, especially as you grow older, because you're going to be confronted with some hard stuff. And don't think that you're going to be able to do all things. There are going to be times where you have to make a choice for God. And so Maximilian Kolbe is someone who made an offering of his life, and actually the person he saved survived the war and had many descendants because of that. So Google Maximilian Kolbe. If you get a chance, watch pieces of Shoah by Claude Lanzmann, and consider what it means that Jesus on the cross is with us in solidarity and love.